How bad are ultra-processed foods? Well, it depends on who you ask. But maybe the first question to ask is, what are ultra-processed foods? Let's take a look. Hi, I'm Dave Brown, and welcome to the Dementia Monster channel. So what are we talking about here? For our purposes, in the Dementia Toolkit, for diet, we focused on the correlation of refined sugar and refined flour with inflammation in the brain. Inflammation and oxidation are bad for Alzheimer's disease. But the thought is that beyond those factors, more bad stuff is going on with powdered instant soup, reconstituted meat products, carbonated soft drinks, sweetened breakfast cereals, candy, packaged snacks, etc. These may or may not be causing the worldwide obesity epidemic, and obesity is associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease. Over the past couple of years, there have been several articles in the media emphasizing a link between what are referred to as ultra-processed foods and the development of Alzheimer's disease, or more accurately, food products, since they're not exactly real food. You can see example articles linked in the show notes. What prompted this interest was a study published in the July 27, 2022 issue of Neurology, the Journal of the American Academy of Neurology, entitled Association of Ultraprocessed Food Consumption with Risk of Dementia, a Prospective Cohort. Chinese researchers, using data on citizens of the UK, found an association between consumption of ultraprocessed foods and the incidence of dementia. They found that for every 10% increase in daily intake of ultraprocessed foods, people had a 25% higher risk of dementia. In other words, a small increase in the consumption of ultraprocessed foods led to a big jump in the risk of dementia. The authors were careful to point out that they found an association, not necessarily a causal relationship. Recall that worldwide, the government of China is the second biggest funder of Alzheimer's research behind the US government. The Alzheimer's Association is third. So what do we mean by ultra-processed foods? Ultra-processed foods are high in added sugar, fat, and salt, and low in protein and fiber. There's a system called NOVA for categorizing food processing. That's not an acronym. NOVA means new in Portuguese, and it's short for new classification. The system came to us from Brazil, where they speak Portuguese. NOVA breaks foods down into 4 levels, like this. 1. Unprocessed or minimally processed food. Think apples from the produce section of the supermarket. 2. Processed culinary ingredients like sauces and perhaps salad dressing. 3. Processed foods like plain yogurt. And then ultra-processed food and drink products. So what's special about ultra-processed foods? In 2009, the Brazilian nutrition researcher Carlos Monteiro at the Center for Epidemiological Research in Nutrition and Health at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, coined the term. He had noticed an explosion of obesity in Brazil that coincided with an explosion in the consumption of what he considered foods subject to too much processing. He said the term doesn't relate to the food itself, but rather to all of the processing. What foods are in question? You're not going to like this. Here are some examples. Carbonated soft drinks, sweet, fatty, or salty packaged snacks, candies, mass-produced packaged breads and buns, cookies, biscuits, pastries, cakes, and cake mixes, margarine and other spreads, sweetened breakfast cereals, sweetened fruit yogurt and energy drinks, powdered and packaged instant soups, noodles, and desserts, pre-prepared meat, cheese, pasta, and pizza dishes, poultry and fish nuggets and sticks, sausages, hamburgers, hot dogs, and other reconstituted meat products. You'll note that none of these foods are included in the MIND diet, the DASH diet, or the Mediterranean diet. Of course, not all ultra-processed foods are created equal. For example, plant-based hamburgers could be both of nutritional high quality, but also be classified as ultra-processed. But check the label. No trans fats or other problematic ingredients. We never use the term ultra-processed foods in beating the dementia monster. Nevertheless, they have no place in the dementia toolkit, and they have no place in your diet if you're concerned about your brain health or your weight. More recently, I came across a fascinating article in the New Yorker magazine that first reviewed some interesting research conducted at the National Institute of Health, but then interviewed some of the critics of the research. The outcome was a sort of survey of diverse thinking on the subject, and it is diverse. The concept of ultraprocessed foods was proposed by the Brazilian researcher we discussed earlier, but research aimed at confirming the hypothesis that anything meeting the definition of ultraprocessed food will put you in memory care has been mixed. The research was published in the journal Cell Metabolism. They weren't concerned with Alzheimer's disease, but rather obesity. However, we know that anything that causes obesity can lead to Alzheimer's. Does consuming ultra-processed foods really cause obesity, or is that a myth? And if so, why? The answer is yes, it does. But calorie for calorie, the researchers concluded that the influence on body mass is the same between ultra-processed foods and real foods. It seems that, more than anything, people just like the soda, pepperoni, and ice cream a lot more than kale and eggs, and so they drink and eat a lot more of it. The article did discuss the spectrum of foods that can be classified as ultra-processed, noting that they're not all bad for you. It kind of depends. Yogurt with cane sugar and fruit in it can be considered ultra-processed, but the article says that doesn't mean that it's very bad for you. We'll note that people with lactose intolerance and those concerned that dairy in general has a downside may not agree. So some critics don't think there's been adequate discernment between the types of ultra-processed foods that are or are not a problem. Hamburgers are considered ultra-processed, but at least when prepared at home and cooked properly, don't share health concerns we have with potato chips. How the research was conducted was quite interesting. They took 10 men and 10 women and locked them away for a couple of weeks. They were watched closely enough to make sure that no one ate anything that wasn't provided to them in the study protocol. They all got the same exercise. And they were all given as much food as they wanted to eat during 60-minute meal times, rotating between unprocessed and ultra-processed foods at the end of each week. Steps were taken to obscure what class of food people were being given. Test participants were weighed at the end of each rotation of foods. Participants gained an average of nearly 0.9 pounds after a week on ultra-processed foods, but lost an average of about 0.7 pounds after a week on real food. The authors concluded, our data suggests that eliminating ultra-processed foods from the diet decreases energy intake and results in weight loss, whereas a diet with a large proportion of ultra-processed foods increases energy intake and leads to weight gain. The researchers explained that when people ate ultra-processed foods, they just ate more, and so they took in more calories. It was not that ounce for ounce the ultra-processed foods made you fatter. This take, of course, does not address our concerns with respect to Alzheimer's disease about foods that might promote inflammation and oxidation. The critics point out that this was a small study and the results need to be replicated by other researchers. Others believe that the research won't have meaning unless you're able to separate the more nutritious hamburger from the potato chips and other junk food, since their influence probably varies a lot. For me, I just try to stick with the Mind diet, avoiding ultra-processed foods. I do eat plain yogurt that I sweeten with allulose and monk fruit sweeteners, mixing in walnuts and blueberries, which might qualify as ultra-processed. So thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. You can find links to the material we discussed in the show notes below. There's also a link to our Alzheimer's blog where we have a much bigger repository of articles relevant to people who want to learn more about how to beat the dementia monster. Thanks and have a great day.